In the vast, unforgiving landscape of the Wild West, where the sun beat down on the dry earth and the wind carried the dust of memories, Sarah McCall walked her farm with the weight of the world on her shoulders. Widowed for only a few months, she carried not only the pain of loss, but also a silent promise to herself, never again to allow anyone to invade her heart or her life with the same intensity as in the past. The farm, once a symbol of hope shared with her husband, was now her only refuge, an extension of her own strength and resilience. Sarah was no ordinary woman. Her firm posture and resolute gaze revealed a courage few could comprehend. Within the worn walls of the small house, happy memories echoed, but so did the distant sound of gunshots from that fateful night that took the love of her life. Since then, she faced the challenge of maintaining the property alone, battling the unforgiving nature, the suspicious looks of her neighbors, and the constant threats of outlaws who coveted her land. In Dust Valley, the word widow carried judgment and doubt, but Sarah transformed these uncertainties into fuel to move forward. Loneliness seemed to embrace her with every step, and the harshness of the routine didn't dampen her spirit. She woke before dawn, tended the animals, repaired broken fences, and fought to keep the farm from succumbing to neglect or the greed of others. But despite all her determination, there was an open wound that wouldn't heal, the memory of a man who promised to love her forever, but who now lingered in the shadows of the past. This pain, silent and deep, was the invisible thread that guided her actions, keeping her from any possibility of a new beginning. The townspeople murmured, some offering help disguised as curiosity, others judging her refusal to move forward. But Sarah remained firm in her decision. For her, remarrying meant betraying the memory of that lost love, opening the door to vulnerability when all she wanted was to protect what little she had left. Yet, within this protective wall, there was a hidden, almost forgotten wish that perhaps one day life might hold an unexpected chance for her. But that chance seemed too distant, almost impossible, until a stranger appeared on the horizon of her farm. As the dust rose and the sun set on the horizon, Sarah felt the weight of each day, as if carrying not just the earth, but an invisible burden that tested her courage at every turn. It was a constant struggle between the past she couldn't forget and the future she wasn't yet sure she wanted to face. Sarah McCall's story is the story of many women of the Old West who had to find strength amid loss and courage to fight against what seemed impossible. And it was at this point, on the fine line between grief and hope, that her journey was about to change. When the unexpected arrived, to save not only the farm, but also the closed heart of a woman determined never to love again. This is the story of a love that defies promises made in silence, a tale of second chances that emerge from the ashes of the past, where every decision can mean the difference between survival and rebirth. Sarah McCall didn't yet know that the stranger who crossed her path carried not only the strength to save her farm, but also the key to unlock doors she swore never to open again. What would happen when the impossible began to seem possible? The answer lay just steps away, waiting to be discovered. The sun was already setting on the horizon, casting long shadows across Dust Valley's dusty main street as Jack Turner rode into town on his horse. The steady sound of hooves against the dry earth seemed to mark the rhythm of a man who carried more than just road dust on his boots. Jack was a stranger, a solitary figure, with a battered hat that hid tired eyes that had seen too much yet revealed too little. He walked with the quiet confidence of one who has spent years on the road, but behind that calm lay a storm of secrets, scars from battles fought in the shadows and silence. Dust Valley had seen many outsiders, but there was something about Jack that even the most hardened residents couldn't explain. Rumors swirled in saloons and on porches. Was he a gunslinger, a deserter, a man running from ghosts from the past? But when he dismounted in front of the McCall farmhouse, those whispers died away. What truly caught Sarah's attention especially was the way Jack looked at the land, not as a mere stranger but as someone who recognized the value and the pain of the place. Sarah McCall stood on her porch, arms crossed tightly, eyes narrowed as she watched the strange man approach. She had learned the hard way not to trust easily, especially men who appeared out of nowhere with a mysterious glint in their eyes. The loss of her husband had left a deep wound in her heart, and since then, every moment had been a struggle to protect what was left. Now, a strange man was invading her territory, threatening the fragile balance she had so painstakingly built. When Jack finally spoke, his voice was low but firm, breaking the silence that seemed stretched between them like a rope about to snap. "I hear this place is in trouble." There was no arrogance in his words, just a simple offer, accompanied by a silent invitation. Sarah pressed her lips together, the weight of that word trouble heavier than he could have imagined. Thugs were lurking nearby, her reserves were running low, and she was fighting it all. Still, the question that had been on her mind was uttered firmly. "Who are you, and why do you care?" Jack hesitated for a moment, as if weighing how much he could reveal to a stranger who had every reason to distrust him. "My name is Jack Turner. I'm just a man looking for a place to stay, maybe a helping hand where needed." His gaze met hers, steady and sincere, despite the shadows he carried. There was something in that look, a genuine spark, that made Sarah's heart race, though she refused to show it. Their first encounter was a delicate dance between distrust and incipient hope. Sarah watched as Jack moved around the farm, repairing a broken fence, scaring away a coyote that was stalking the animals. His hands were skillful, his knowledge of the land evident in every gesture. But it wasn't just his practical assistance that caught her attention. It was the respect he demonstrated for the place, the way he treated the land as if it were his own. But doubts remained. Who was Jack Turner, really? What had brought him to this forgotten corner of the world? There was a hardness in his smile, a tension beneath his calm that spoke of battles fought far away. Battles Sarah could only imagine, and yet in his presence, something inside her began to shift. The icy armor she had worn for so long began to crack, letting in a faint light of possibility. Jack seemed drawn not only to the land, but to the woman who guarded it so resolutely. He knew pain, his own. Wounds taught him to recognize those of others, and though he carried his own burden, there was a firmness in his eyes, a silent promise to protect, to fight for something worthwhile. But protecting came at a price, and as Jack adapted to the routine of Dust Valley, it became clear that his past was not as distant as he wished. Every evening, as the sun disappeared behind the hills and the wind rustled through the dry grasses, Sarah found herself staring at the stable where Jack's horse was, tethered. This man was an enigma, shrouded in silence and strength, a stranger who could be the answer to her prayers, or the harbinger of a new storm. The villagers kept their distance, unsure whether to welcome or fear him, but Sarah's heart, scarred and wary, recognized a kindred spirit. Behind their growing connection, shadows of old wounds and untold stories bubbled, ready to explode and change everything. Who was Jack Turner, really? Why had fate placed this stranger on her doorstep just when she'd sworn never to let anyone in again? As the night wore on, the questions grew, weaving a web of suspense and hope that neither of them could ignore. And so, as the first stars dotted the dark sky over Dust Valley, Sarah and Jack stood on the brink of something they didn't yet fully understand, a fragile beginning, born of pain, resistance, and the silent promise that even the most guarded hearts can find a common rhythm again. What secrets did Jack hide beneath his calm? What dangers lurked beyond the hills? The answers lay ahead, waiting to be discovered at the next dawn. The wind blew hard that afternoon in the arid region of Dust Valley, carrying with it the desert dust and the smell of dry earth. The McCall's small farm seemed more vulnerable than ever, its fences scarred by gunshots and footprints betraying the recent presence of ruthless bandits. Sarah McCall, her face etched with weariness, and her eyes filled with a determination only pain can sculpt, gazed out over the ravaged field. The farm, a legacy of a past she had sworn to protect alone, was about to be swept away, not only by the hands of criminals, but also by the scarcity of resources and the harsh realities of the Wild West. At that moment, every dry leaf that fell seemed to whisper a sentence of abandonment. Jack Turner was there, by her side, even though he was initially met with distrust and resistance. The shadow of the mysterious stranger loomed large, and Sarah wasn't sure she could trust this man who had appeared out of nowhere. But the urgency of the situation forced an alliance, albeit a reluctant one. Jack knew that the farm's survival depended not only on hard work, but on the courage to face danger head-on. His silent footsteps in the dust already had a clear purpose: to protect what Sarah had sworn to keep intact. That night, the silence that usually dominated Dust Valley was shattered by gunshots and muffled screams. A group of bandits, eager to take what wasn't theirs, appeared on the McCall property, their eyes shining with the promise of easy violence. Sarah, despite the fear burning in her veins, didn't back down. Jack stood by her side, steady as a rock in the midst of the storm. He had shown more than strength. He demonstrated an innate skill with a gun, a precision that stemmed from a tortuous past he still kept to himself. Each shot fired not only bullets, but also the hope Sarah was beginning to feel, the feeling that perhaps she wouldn't have to fight alone anymore. They moved in silent synchrony, Jack guarding the vulnerable points of the fence, Sarah guiding the few remaining workers to reinforce the equipment and secure the most valuable supplies. The sky was covered in dark clouds, and the smell of gunpowder mingled with the sweat and dust of battle. Every moment was a race against time, a dangerous dance where one mistake could mean the end of the farm and everything it represented to Sarah. The fight was not just for the land, but for the legacy of a man who could no longer be there to defend it, and for a future that still seemed distant. Jack, with his dark past, revealed himself to be more than an outsider. He was a protector, someone who knew the price of fighting and didn't hesitate to pay. Skills that had previously served to flee or hide were now used to face the enemy and keep hope alive. In one of these gunfights, Sarah saw the intense gleam in Jack's eyes, not the gleam of violence, but of determination, that fire that arises when you have something worth saving. The connection between them began to strengthen, not just through the fight, but through the trust that slowly emerged amidst the chaos. But the danger wasn't just from armed bandits. The ranch was sinking into debt, supplies were scarce, and the harsh realities of the Wild West left no room for error. Sarah knew that each night won was a battle won, but she also felt the weight of each day spent without a break. Jack wasn't just a shield against attacks. He also helped find solutions, negotiating with traders, organizing repairs, and bringing the discipline of a man who had seen the world at its cruelest. Little by little, the ranch became the invisible link that united two destinies until then separated by wounds and secrets. The sun was rising again, and the small farmstead began to rise from the ashes of the previous night. Sarah, her hands still bruised and her body exhausted, looked at Jack with a mixture of gratitude and doubt. It was a start, but the road ahead was still long and full of dangers neither of them could have foreseen. The need to survive and the renewed hope created a tenuous bond, capable of withstanding any storm, at least for now. As the day wore on, shadows of past and future began to intertwine, and the question lingered in the air. How far was Jack willing to go to save what seemed impossible, and what was Sarah willing to accept when the price of protection became higher than she ever imagined? The answer was yet to come, hidden in the coming hours, in the coming challenges, And so, in the silence between one sigh and the next, the McCall farm stood firm, protected by a man who was more than a stranger and a woman who, against all odds, was beginning to believe that perhaps she wasn't alone. But the true test was yet to come, and their story was just beginning. Dusk cast a golden light over the McCall farm, tinting the sky with hues of orange and purple as the day drew to a close. The air was charged with an almost unreal calm, the stillness found only after a battle. Sarah McCall walked slowly along the porch, her hands still trembling slightly from recent events, her gaze lost on the horizon where the shadows were beginning to lengthen. The farm seemed to breathe with her, the silent fields and fences still marked by the marks of conflict, like scars that refused to fade. The hardship of life, the weight of loss, all of it was etched into every inch of that land, and, most deeply, into Sarah's heart. At that moment, Jack Turner appeared at her side, walking softly, as if trying not to break the fragile balance that had formed between them. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was filled with an invisible tension, as if a pent-up storm were about to erupt, but also a silent promise that something new could rise from the ashes. It was the beginning of something delicate and complex, a dance of second chances and unspoken secrets, where each word carried more weight than the silence. Sarah turned to Jack, her eyes filled with a mixture of distrust and hope. The promise she'd made to herself to never depend on anyone again seemed to be tested by this man who'd appeared in her life with the strength of a storm and the calm of a deep river. "Why are you really here, Jack? I don't need a savior, and I don't want to be saved," she said, her voice firm, but her soul trembling. Jack paused for a moment, looking away before finally finding the courage to respond. "I know you don't want help, Sarah, and I didn't come here to be your hero. I came because I know what it's like to carry wounds that time doesn't heal, and because I want to believe that, even when broken, we can find a way." His words were heavy, laden with a sincerity that touched a part of Sarah she had long buried. It was as if that conversation was more than just a dialogue. It was the opening of two wounded souls who, no matter how hard they tried, couldn't deny the connection that was beginning to emerge between them. Jack, his past shrouded in shadows, felt the weight of a secret he didn't yet dare reveal, something that could destroy everything he was trying to build with Sarah. He carried pain that wasn't visible on the surface, scars from a life marked by violence, difficult choices, and a tortuous path that led him far away. But for the first time, he seemed to have a reason to stay. Sarah, for her part, struggled with the fear that consumed her, the fear of opening up, of trusting, of allowing anyone into her world. She was a woman who had learned to fend for herself, who carried the pain of loss and the strength of survival, but who felt, perhaps for the first time, the silent call of love and hope. "I don't know if I can trust you, Jack, or even myself," she confessed, her voice breaking, her eyes shining with pent-up emotion. The gentle wind that blew across the porch seemed to carry with it secrets and unspoken truths as the shadows of night began to envelop the farm. It was as if past and present intertwined in that instant, creating a space where the impossible began to seem possible. Sarah's internal struggle, whether to continue alone or accept Jack's outstretched hand, reflected the battle many face. The battle between protecting their hearts and surrendering to their feelings. Jack approached slowly, not to invade, but to offer a bit of his silence and companionship. He knew time was of the essence, that wounds required patience, and that trust, once broken, took time to rebuild. But there was a weight in his gaze that Sarah couldn't yet comprehend, a secret that threatened to undo the faint hope that was beginning to emerge. It was a mystery shrouded in shadows, lurking beneath the surface of their growing connection. As the sky darkened and the stars began to appear, illuminating the vastness of the Old West, Sarah and Jack stood on the threshold of something that could change their lives forever. Love, in that harsh and unforgiving landscape, emerged like a delicate flame, threatened by the past that insisted on not being extinguished. Could two souls so wounded find the strength to heal in each other, or would their secrets and fears be stronger than hope? That night, with the distant sound of wolves and the whisper of wind in the dry trees, the McCall farm held more than land and stories. It held the beginning of a journey of courage, of second chances, and of truths yet to be revealed. What Sarah and Jack didn't yet know was that the past wasn't as far away as they'd hoped, and that to move forward they would have to face not only the ghosts within themselves, but also those lurking in the shadows around them. And so, as night embraced Dust Valley, the promise of a new beginning hung in the air, delicate, uncertain, but undeniably real. Their story was far from over, and the next chapter was waiting to be unfolded. The sun was rising over the Dust Valley horizon, dyeing the sky a deep red that seemed to herald a storm. The McCall farm breathed in the morning breeze, but the tranquility was only an illusion about to be shattered. Sarah McCall walked along the edge of the fence, surveying every inch of her land with watchful eyes, her heart beating rapidly, as if sensing what was to come. Behind her, Jack Turner adjusted his shotgun with steady, silent hands, while tension hung in the air like a dark cloud. They had fought so hard to get here, each day earned with blood, sweat, and tears, and now fate was summoning them to the final challenge. The farm wasn't just land and timber, it was a symbol of resistance, of the courage they both needed to survive. The previous attacks had left deep scars, but they had also strengthened the bond between Sarah and Jack, who were now not just allies, but two hearts intertwined in the same struggle. The distant sound of hooves in the dust indicated that the bandits were returning, more numerous and ferocious than ever, hungry for revenge and possession of what had never belonged to them. The once constant threat now became imminent, a danger that demanded everything they had to protect not only the farm, but the future that was beginning to emerge there. With her face shrouded in shadows and her gaze fixed on the valley, Sarah felt the weight of the decision she had avoided for so long. The silent promise to never give herself to another man again, made in the heat of pain and loss, seemed to hang by a tenuous thread. But beside Jack, she saw not only strength, but also a vulnerability that mirrored her own, proof that true courage lies not in hiding wounds, but in facing them together. The farm, that battered patch of land, had become the stage where they would write their final battle, and perhaps the first chapter of a new beginning. When the bandits arrived, chaos erupted amidst the pre-dawn silence. The sound of gunshots, screams, and hooves pounding the earth seemed to vibrate every fiber of Sarah and Jack's being. They moved in perfect synchrony, protecting every corner, every resource, every dream held within those fields. Jack displayed skill and courage Sarah had never seen before, while she, with fierce determination, faced the fear that tried to eat away at her heart. The battle was intense, a fight for survival that tested both their physical and emotional limits. As the last shot rang out and the dust settled, Sarah and Jack stood there panting, their eyes shining with the adrenaline of victory and the relief of having protected what they loved. The farm was saved, but something greater had happened in that confrontation, a silent transformation that forever changed the way Sarah saw her own heart. The promise made in a moment of pain now gave way to a conscious choice, an opening to love and hope, recognizing that strength and vulnerability can go hand in hand, that rebirth is possible even when all seems lost. In that moment, under the lightening sky, Sarah held Jack's hand tightly, the simple gesture charged with meaning. It was more than a touch, it was the promise of a shared future, of a life built on courage, respect, and the ability to reinvent themselves. They had faced the impossible, conquered their own ghosts, and discovered that true love doesn't erase scars, but transforms them into marks of resilience. The McCall farm, a silent witness to battles and rebirths, remained, standing firm against the wind and time, just like Sarah and Jack. They knew the path ahead would still hold challenges, but they also knew they no longer had to face them alone. The past, with its pain and secrets, might still haunt, but the present offered a rare and precious opportunity, the chance to begin again, to love and to live intensely. As the sun rose, illuminating the vastness of the Old West, Sarah and Jack's story was no longer just a fight for survival. It was a celebration of the courage born when two wounded souls choose to unite, of the hope that blossoms when we allow ourselves to love again. And so, in the silence of that morning, amid the smell of wet earth and the distant sound of birds, a new chapter began, full of possibilities, where love and courage would be the protagonists of a life worth living. But what did the future hold for them? What challenges would they still face? These answers, as well as the next step in their journey, were about to be revealed. If you've made it this far, I want to thank you for following this story. With me, it's always a pleasure to share these moments filled with emotion, courage, and hope, and knowing we're on this journey together makes all the difference. If you liked what you heard, why not subscribe to the channel? That way, you won't miss the next chapters of these stories that speak directly to the heart, in the style we love, full of emotion and drama of the Old West. And, if you'd like, leave the phrase, "I'm with you until the end," in the comments, so I know this message reached you too, and we'll stay connected. Oh, and if you're enjoying this vibe, leave a like on the video. It doesn't have to be anything long, just so we know we're in this together. There's a video here that complements this topic and brings you even more intense and moving stories. Click there and stay with me there, as we have much more to share. See you soon.